Hey everyone, it's Kelly from Silly Moon Quilting Co. I hope you're doing great today. In today's video, we're going to be taking a crib size quilt and I'm going to walk you through how I quilt it. We're going to start it on our domestic B735 Bernina, and we're going to finish it on the Q16 with the lift table, just so that you can see the two ways that I set up, depending on what machine I'm going to be using my rulers on and quilting with. So stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoy. Okay, so we're going to be starting today this quilt on the domestic machine. So today I'm using the B735 by Bernina. Great little machine. And you'll notice here that the first thing I do when I put my new foot on is I change to the correct foot setting on my machine. Good idea, no matter what machine you are, if you have the foot adjustment, to make sure you're on the right foot. So I've got the number 72 foot here, which happens to be my ruler foot. And in fact, I'll show you here, I'm actually using the 72S. And I like the 72S because it has this little slit right here. And I just find that little slit makes things a whole lot nicer when I'm trying to pull my thread around. So I just have my machine sitting on top of the table. I don't have it sunken in or a special table. It's just on my regular desk here. The other thing I need to do before I get started with this is I need to drop my feed dogs. So on the Bernina, it's right here, drop my feed dogs. And you'll notice that I'm using a large spool of thread, and that's because I'm going to be, I like the color, and I'm going to be using it here, and I'm also going to be using it on the long arm once I'm done here. So I've got it on a spool stand so that I can make that same thread work. And then on my other side of the desk, as I'm trying to get ready and get set up for ruler quilting on this machine, you'll notice here that I've got kind of what I need to get started. So I've got my ruler. I'm going to be quilting this one with PICKET Fence. Let's see, get some better light there. I put in a new needle in my machine. There's my other 72 foot just to show you all set up, but I will be using the 72S. I've got a pair of scissors, and they're going to help me cut my sticky tape that comes with all my rulers. And I've got my really well used gloves. I think maybe it's time to get a new pair. But the other thing I want to show you is how I kind of set this up. So depending on the quilt that I'm using, I've actually got an extra table here on the side. So if I was quilting a larger quilt, this one's not that big, but if I was quilting a larger quilt, I would build up this area around here. So I might even put some books in around here up to this level because my table's not sunken in. And that's going to help me, or my machine's not sunken in rather, that's going to help me kind of take the weight of that quilt when I'm quilting with rulers or free motion quilting on my domestic machine. So I put this table here. Sometimes I'll have the table on the side here. Kind of depends where the bulk of my quilt will be. So I start with it just like this. I lay the quilt top on top, and then I kind of decide what I need around here to create any weight or take any of the weight so that it's not catching while I'm doing this. The other thing that I will be adding to this, because I'm going to be quilting this here, is called a Teflon sheet or a Supreme slider. And I'll show you that when I actually go to put the quilt on here. But it just makes it a little bit easier on here to make the quilt slide a little bit easier. So I'm just going to get the quilt on here and get that all set up, and I'll show you what that looks like. So now I have put my Supreme slider, or Teflon mat, or whatever you want to call it, on my domestic machine. Makes it a little bit easier for me to slide things along. You can see mine is very well used. I've got my quilt here. This is the quilt that we're going to be quilting today. And I've got my ruler all ready to go. I've got my sticky tape placed on it. That all comes with the packages. Remember, when you're using our sticky tape, don't use your fabric scissors to do this. So I've got that all ready to go. So now I'm just going to set up so that you can see what I'm filming. And I'm going to be using PICKET Fence, and we're going to see how fast we can get this done. Like I said, I'm going to do half of it on this machine, and then I'm going to swap to the long arm so that you can see how it looks on both machines. So I've got everything all set up here. I've got, again, we'll recap, 72S ruler foot. I've got a brand new needle in. I'm using Wonderfil confetti on the top thread, and kind of a nice light pink. And I'm actually using Deco Bob in the bobbin, which is this. Which is this. It's a 80 weight thread, and I just find that that makes the back look nice. It gives the texture, and it's a thread that blends. This is my backing for this quilt. Nice little batik that I've got. And yeah. So we're going to pull up our ruler. I'm going to be using, like I said, Picket Fence for this one. It works out that there's a line here, an edge of my quilt, and I'm going to be using the line in the center of Picket Fence to line up on there. It just kind of works out nicely. Kind of lined it up, and it brings me down to here on the bottom of the quilt. It brings me down to here, which is enough room for me to trim this up. We always want to make sure we've got enough room to trim up the quilt, but it's still putting enough stitching close enough to the edge that things aren't going to be a problem, and it gives me room to bind it. So I'm just going to give you an overview here, and I'm going to come out a little bit. So you can see when I'm working on my domestic machine for a quilt, I've got the one side of the quilt all rolled up. If it's larger than this, this is a kind of a lap size quilt. If it's larger than this, I will actually maybe binder clip the edge of this together, and that's going to help me keep it together as I'm moving. Because Picket Fence is a nice easy ruler to just go along the edge, I'm going to start it here and just move over and then stop, making sure that I have my needle in my down position when I start quilting. Then I'm going to come along and I can stop here and then pivot the ruler and unroll what I need to move on to the next step. So let's get this all started. I'm going to put my gloves on. And I'm going to line up my ruler where I want to start. And I want to start over here. Keeping in mind with this ruler that you're not starting on the edge here. You're going to nest your ruler foot right in this kind of round here to make sure that you're nice and seated. So I'm going to line up that line on my seam there. I'm going to kind of shift everything around. I'm actually going to bring my ruler foot down away from the ruler. So I'm going to bring it over here and then bring my ruler foot down. And that's going to make it easier for me to be able to slide this in here, and I don't risk having a problem with the ruler clipping the ruler foot clipping the edge of the ruler. I at this point have my needle where it'll stop in the up position so that I can hold my thread and I can bring my bobbin thread up. Then I'm going to lift my ruler foot again, and then I'm just going to grab that bobbin thread and keep everything nice and secure. Grab that bobbin thread. Sometimes you might need tweezers to get the bobbin thread. Never works when you're on camera. I'm just grabbing my bobbin thread and giving it a bit of a pull to the side too. You can see it's a different color. And then I'm going to bring my ruler foot this way. I'm going to pull it, bring my ruler foot down, and then slide it back into position. And give it a couple locking stitches there, just to make sure I'm nice and secure. Then I'm going to drop my ruler foot, or my needle, so it's in that position again. I'm going to double check my line, and then I'm going to follow this path. Now, the thing about Picket Fence is we kind of always want to stick to the outside, because otherwise if we go around here, you may end up with a little bit of a round in here, and it's okay, you're not going to notice it. But if you kind of stick to the outside, so when you come around here, you want to come back to the outside of the path. The path is wide enough that you can come through with your ruler foot. If it was any narrower, you'd end up with binding, and we don't want that. So I'm going to slowly start stitching up here and around here and here. Now keep in mind, when you're stitching on your domestic machine, you're in control of the size of stitches. So work on your hand technique and foot technique, etc. So that's a whole different video. If you're interested in that, you can learn about that in our beginner class. So I'm going to start stitching. and move your hands as you need to. More important on this machine to move your hands as you need to. If you're using the thinner or the 1/8 rulers, really when you come around this corner, put your finger on this just to make sure it doesn't kick up on you. So I've done my first row there, part of my first row. I'm going to move this and slide my ruler, rotate it around. Now, if you don't have the space here to rotate your ruler, so if you don't have the throat space here to rotate your ruler, you can turn your quilt. That'll work too. And the other thing you can do in this situation, so you could rotate your whole quilt. The other thing that you can do to make this a little bit easier for yourself is you can quilt this design front to back, so it minimizes the amount of times you need to turn it. And I'm going to show that. So this is if you've got enough throat space to carry on here. I can do one more stitch to end up back in my center. Line everything up there, and I'm going to do another one. Move my hands as I need to, double check that you're still lined up. And I'm going to stop there. So that's my first two sort of picket fences there. You can see that. But I'm going to turn my quilt so that I can show you what this design would look like if I didn't have a big enough throat space and I wanted to do this design front to back. You can still do the same thing. So I'm going to turn my quilt a quarter of a turn. And I'm all lined up there. And I just want to turn my ruler. So now my ruler is in behind my foot. And I'm going to do a double check and make sure that I'm still on the same line. So I make sure I stay nice and square. So I'm looking in behind my ruler foot and checking that line, making sure it's on my seam. And then I'm just going to quilt this direction. And this is something you might be more comfortable with too. So you can do it either way, whatever works for you. There's no right or wrong way. Stop when you need to and move your hands. And stitch back to that center line. And then I'm just going to unroll what I have rolled there. And then I'm going to rotate my ruler and line it up in behind again and make sure that I'm on that seam. And if you have to stand up and look behind, go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to stop when I reach that little indentation there and rotate this. So keep in mind when you're on your domestic machine or any machine, you can see that this thread is quite bright compared to the white. I did that on purpose because I want to be able to show you the design. But if you use a white thread or a lighter thread or a light gray, I would say a light gray or a light yellow that would blend better. Even if your stitches when you're learning are not really great on here, so maybe some are a little bit tighter together and some are a little bit wider further apart, that's okay. You're not going to see it quite so much once it's all quilted up, right? If you use a lighter thread. Or a thread that blends better, I guess I should say. Pause, just double check and make sure everything's nice and square in behind as you get to this point. to my center again and stop there. Give your quilt a little bit of a touch just to make sure everything's nice and square. Rotate it one more time, and then I'll show you how to end this. And then I am just going to stitch to there because I know that that's fine. I'm just going to lift my ruler foot. It just gives me a little more clearance, and then I'm just going to slide the ruler out. So I finished that line, and I'm going to now switch over to the other machine because now you've seen how this is done on the domestic machine. Just because I have a bigger table over there, and I can talk you through some of the other things I want to talk about. And then we're going to quilt the rest of this up on the sit-down long arm. So I showed you how I set up the BERNINA B735, or my domestic machine, to quilt with rulers. So I'm going to show you now how I set up my long arm. So I've actually taken the foot from my domestic machine, so the 72S, and put it on here. How brilliant is that? The feet are interchangeable. And I'm using, I actually have the lift table, the BERNINA lift table, and it has these wings that come out the side. So I've got those both open just to give myself lots of room. Even though this quilt isn't that big, I do that. I've loaded my bobbin thread with the Deco Bob again from Wonderfil. Checked my tension using the BERNINA tension gauge. Lots of YouTube tutorials about that. I love it. Makes a huge difference. So now I've got my quilt on the table here, and we're going to talk about how to line up the next line of picket fence. So when we're lining up picket fence, we have a couple different options. We can either make these points touch, so you would end up with a big long area in here. You can kind of see how that would look stitched. So we can make those points touch, and we would do that by putting this bottom line on picket fence, the one that goes along the bottom here. That would sit on top of the row we just stitched. Okay, that's going to give us points that look like this. So this piece would be long and open. We'd be stitching up here. That would give us a long open spot. If I decided that I didn't want them to touch, I could move this to the side, and I could still use that same line to line up here, but now my points will kind of nest. So you can see here they come down in on the other side. The danger we have when we do something like this design, when we want them to actually touch, is that because our fabric is fluid, or because our fabric can move, it's easy not to be able to line up that point because we're pushing it through on our domestic machine. On a long arm, it's a little different because the fabric's a little bit more secure. So I tend to not typically do that unless I'm willing to know that when I come down here, I may need to shift my ruler and take one extra stitch, or move my ruler up and take one extra stitch to have those points meet. So totally up to you. I'm going to line it up so that they nest within each other. So I've got one here, so they will be one at the point here, one at the point here, and it's going to be the same all the way along. You can alternatively pick a different point on your quilt if you want a larger space between these. So the way I have it laid up here is this is going to come down to this point here. Just come over top there so you can see that a little bit better. So this point here is going to come at the same level as these points because the line marking on this ruler is where my needle is going to end up. So with this quilt, I do have some other built-in line markings that I could use, or I could draw other line markings if I wanted these to be further apart. So I could certainly do it this way and I would line up this one in the center of the peak of the row before, so I could line it up this way and I would have a larger space. The only thing you want to make sure when you're doing that is it looks even all the way across. So you want to make sure that your spacing from here to here is the same as here to here. So I'm going to actually rely on the ruler to tell me where to line up, and I'm going to line up with my center line on top of the row I just stitched and my vertical lines on the peak of the row below the one I've just started. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So I've got the same thread, my Wonderfil confetti thread, all loaded up there. I'm going to come over to my end here. You can see at the back here, I've got this rolled up just so it stays out of my way. And then I'm going to come over here and get this all stitching. Okay, so I'm going to bring my ruler over. Again, I'm going to put my gloves on. Anytime I'm quilting on either my domestic machine or my sit-down long arm, I like to do that, wear my gloves. Now the table that I'm on, just as another aside, sometimes I'll choose to quilt standing up. I'm going to do a whole nother video on that, but the table, I'm fortunate, it actually lifts up, so I can do that if I choose. I'm going to close everything up here. I'm all threaded. I'm going to just move my quilt down a bit so I can kind of see where I want to line up. And I want to start over on this end. I want to start where the opening is so I don't have to twist all the way through. And I'm going to line this up here so that my lines again on the valley or on the peak of below, I'm lined up over here where I want to start, and I'm going to just mirror or repeat the row that I just started. So same thing as we did on the domestic machine. I'm going to bring this over here, and because I've got that slit in that foot, it makes it super easy. So I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to bring my ruler foot down again. Be very careful where you're going to put your ruler foot down. Make sure your quilt is nice and square. Lining up your lines. Do one stitch down to pull up my bobbin thread. Lift my foot up, and then I can reach under there. If you find that you can't quite get your bobbin thread, if you're using this foot that has the slit, it's another reason I like it. I can pull that out that way, and now I've got my top and bobbin thread. But if you don't have that foot, you can easily just slide this to the side and grab it, or move your ruler out of the way and just make sure when you bring it back, you line everything up again to make sure that you're well and lined up. I'm going to come back there. Bring my ruler foot down, do a couple locking stitches, move that to the side, and then I'm just going to carry on along here. Now, if you look at my stitches that I do on my domestic machine, they're quite large, and that's the look that I choose and I like. So when I'm working on my domestic machine or my Q16, I will actually drop my stitch length to 8. It defaults to 10, but I like it at 8. It kind of creates a bigger stitch, especially if I'm using a little bit heavier thread, creates a bit of a bigger stitch, and it also makes it easier to pick out if I've made a mistake. So I'm going to make sure I'm all lined up there, and then I'm going to start going across my quilt. So one other thing I'll do to kind of make sure I'm getting nice sharp points, especially when you've got a stitch regulator, is I'll come up, and when I reach the peak of this one or the valley here, I make sure that I take an extra second, not a millisecond, just in that spot, and maybe I make sure the needle goes up and down so that I've got a good stitch there so it's not so rounded. And then I'm going to reach the bottom. At this point, I'm going to make sure, I should have made sure at the beginning that my needle stays in down position. Then I can just pivot my ruler. Again, line up on the row below using both of these lines. And sometimes you'll need to do a little adjusting because, like I said before, the fabric moves. So I want to check my center lines here, and I want to check that I'm across the top of that line. And then I'm just going to keep doing another row. stop when I reach the bottom, give everything a bit of a flatten, rotate my ruler, and line up my next row. Do one more, rotate it again. You should be lining up fairly close. If you're not, just kind of as you're moving along, shift your ruler a little bit. I'm close enough there. I'm happy with that. Stop when I get to that point and rotate it and do another one. Same thing, making sure I'm lined up in the center of the row below. Stop when I get to that point, and one more to get myself off the edge of the quilt. Again, making sure I'm nice and lined up, and if you need to kind of just make everything nice and flat, do that. And then I'm going to stitch off my quilt, same as before, lift my ruler foot, slide this out, move that out of the way, and then I'm just going to stitch up the side. I can use the edge of my ruler here just to stitch up the side. I'm going to come back a bit, stitch up the side, and I want to figure out where I need to be because I want to start my next row by doing the same thing. So I need to move over that way a little bit to make sure that I'm lined up here. So I'm going to move over a little bit, and that's where I need to be. So now I can stitch up to my opening, come back in there, and I can start my next row. So I've stitched up and over, lined up my next row there, and I'm going to stitch back the other direction. So my first one I did going from left to right. The second one I'm going to go from right to left. And I'm going to speed this up because I think you understand now how this works. Show you here. So here I didn't stick to the outside, like I mentioned, and take that extra stitch. So it creates a bit of a rounder, and that's okay. You can decide which you like better. I want to show you what you would like. This one I've stopped in the corner, done a nice sharp point. This one I rounded this corner a little bit. So totally up to you which look you prefer. Again. Show you what this looks like, and then I'll carry on stitching and show you what it's finished. And then again, I'm just going to stitch off. I'm going to lift my ruler foot. I'm going to just jimmy my ruler out of there. Unroll what's above. Make sure my quilt's nice and flat. Bring my ruler foot back down. And then I'm going to take a quick look here where I need to be. So I know that this is where I need to be for my next row. So I can now stitch up this side. And I'm not worried about this part because I'm going to cut this off anyway. But I can stitch up to here. And then I can stitch in to here. And line everything up as I would and carry on. So I'm going to carry on and stitch this, and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like when it's all done. So I'm almost done this quilt, but I wanted to talk to you about one more thing, and this is kind of the nice thing about using a ruler such as this that is symmetrical and it's even on both sides. So sometimes when we're quilting, we end up with a lot of quilt on our lap, and it makes it difficult to kind of move things around. But the beauty of a ruler like this, when you're repeating the design, and this is on your domestic or your long arm, you can actually take your quilt, and I can rotate this around so that the bulk is now behind my quilt, and now I'm working with less in front, but I still can line up and use my ruler exactly the same way as I go across here. So just kind of maneuver your quilt to where it's in a position that's going to work easiest for you. Okay, so I'm just going to finish this up and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so we finished quilting this up. You can see what it looks like. We're going to, of course, trim it up, bind it, and then we're done, ready to go. So super easy. I hope that you enjoyed that one. This is Picket Fence is what we used for this one. But I wanted to show you another one that I recently finished too. And this one was quilted with TWISTIE. So similar idea of an overall design, but you can see the pattern is a little less geometric and a little bit more random. So I'll just show you what that ruler looks like. And that's TWISTIE here. Looks like this. So again, you do it exactly the same. It's a simple kind of overall meander, and it's just a really great way to get your quilts quilted fairly quickly, but have them look pretty awesome in the process. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial, and you can see how fast and easy it is to quilt using an overall design ruler like TWISTIE or Picket Fence. Super fast, super easy, and you can do it on either your domestic or your long arm. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Did you know that only 50% of the people that watch my videos actually subscribe? And it helps us huge with the algorithm with YouTube. So if you could take a moment and hit that subscribe button, we'd greatly appreciate it. Have an amazing day.